Another month is over, so it's time to recap everything I watched in March. I started off the month with Dune Part 2, and this movie really blew me away. I thought Part 1 was good, but only being half a story really held me back from truly loving it. But Part 2 takes all of that setup and pays it off perfectly. The visuals are absolutely jaw-dropping and gorgeous. There are so many set pieces in this that instantly join the all-timer sci-fi pantheon. But it's not just the scale of the visuals that is impressive, but the scale of the story. Going in blind on how this narrative would unfold, I was surprised but extremely impressed at how Denis Villeneuve and Frank Herbert twist the traditional hero narrative into something more contemplative and damning. It's an indictment of how blind loyalty and religious fanaticism can be weaponized and corrupted. It's about the destructive nature of getting high on your own spice supply. Just incredible and bold stuff that I'm not used to seeing in a studio blockbuster this big and this popular. I loved it. And then I watched David Lynch's Dune and had some different thoughts. I'm a pretty big David Lynch fan, but I'd never seen this one based on the pretty universal panning it's received, and honestly, I can see why. I think Lynch and the studio notes that forced edits on this failed to actually adapt this book to make it accessible as a film. It feels like everything is thrown on screen, and as someone who went in already knowing the story, I still had a hard time following the plot. It also makes the strange decision to put its narrative focus on the first half of the story, doing a decent job of portraying the fall of House Atreides, but then Paul's life with the Fremen and their final battle against the Harkonnens is so extremely rushed that it fails to have any sort of emotional or thematic impact. I mean, Paul and Chani share like 5 minutes of screen time with each other tops. I think where the film excels is in some of its visuals. The set design, the costumes, the practical effects. Lynch has always been a master at crafting imagery that you've never seen before, and he's clearly having a blast in this Arrakis sandbox. I think all of the performances are solid here, but most of the actors just don't have enough material to work with to deliver anything particularly memorable. Though I will say there are a pair of standouts that I actually prefer to Villeneuve's version. The Harkonnens' Mentat Piter has a much larger role here, and Brad Dourif makes the most of his elevated screen time. And Kenneth McMillan as the Baron really stole the whole movie for me. His character design is disgusting, and he's covered with boils and lesions, and the performance is so over the top and just absolutely gnawing on the scenery. I had a blast with the Baron in this movie, and now I kinda wish Stellan Skarsgård brought a little bit of this energy to his performance in the new adaptation. So overall, it's a huge mess, but a fascinating one. And then I rewatched a couple of Christopher Nolan movies for my video ranking all of his movies to date, so check that video out if you want my fuller thoughts. First up was Nolan's debut feature Following, and I find this thing to be really fascinating. Some big name auteur directors come out of the gate with their first feature, feeling like they fully mastered their own voice and style, and command immediate respect. Following is not that kind of movie. It's a calling card prototype of a movie used to get Nolan the funding to make that flag-planting feature, which would turn out to be Memento. Following was made with almost no budget and made up almost entirely of non-professional actors. And while the budget limitations are easily understandable and excused in terms of limiting the scale of the action, it unfortunately seems like it also limited Nolan's story in ways that it shouldn't. You look at movies like Darren Aronofsky's Pi, or Shane Carruth's Primer, or even a recent favorite of mine, Yuta Yamaguchi's Beyond the Infinite 2 Minutes, and you see films that explore massive thought-provoking ideas in ways that feel both intimate and grand, despite their own similar budget constraints. And that's not to say Following is bad. I think it's a solid little thriller. It's just way more interesting as a stepping stone in Christopher Nolan's career than as its own piece of art. And then there's Insomnia, which is ironically another stepping stone prototype movie for Nolan, but a much more successful one. If Following was the test Nolan had to pass to secure funding for his first professional movie, Insomnia is the first film that proved Nolan could step up into the world of major studio fare, and his reward for his success was being handed the reins to a little character called Batman. Insomnia totally stands on its own feet as a compelling thriller, playing with the detective genre a little to reveal the killer early on and have the interplay between the cop and killer become its central focus. With Al Pacino, Robin Williams, and Hilary Swank, Nolan isn't just working with professional actors, he's working with all-time greats. The script is sharp and takes time to properly explore its central conflict and themes, and it looks great. It's moody and foggy, and that chase across across the floating logs is really fun and inspired. And then I watched Stanicky, which aims to be a throwback to the raunchy studio comedies of the 90s popularized by director Peter Farrelly. If it was actually released in the 90s, it'd probably be a decent if forgettable effort. Released today, it feels outdated and kinda lame. The plot is about a trio of friends who have blamed all of their misdeeds throughout their lives on a made-up friend named Stanicky. Now, adults who use Ricky to get out of doing boring wife stuff like attending your own child's baby shower, the heat is on for the friends to prove that Ricky is real, so they hire a struggling actor, played by John Cena, to pose as their made-up friend, and hijinks ensue. Like a lot of Farrelly Brothers movies in the 90s, the tone of this thing is weird. The central plot is extremely problematic and mean-spirited, but we're supposed to root for our central trio of protagonists. The jokes are all gross-out gags that often miss the mark completely, but do occasionally land. And then in the end, it veers into a sappy story about the power of family and friendship. There are a few moments that I found funny, mainly due to John Cena's incredible commitment to the bit. But one of the things I found genuinely impressive about this movie is that it cast a lot of its supporting roles with actors with disabilities and never really calls attention to it. Representation matters, and I wasn't expecting Ricky frickin' Stanicky to be a positive example of that. Next, I watched Wicked Little Letters, which is a British period comedy about a series of anonymously written crude letters shaking the morals of a small, modest religious community. Going into this, I thought the letters themselves would be a device to bring in some more overt anachronistic comedy into the period setting. But overall, this is actually just a quaint little British period piece. Olivia Colman and Jessie Buckley are both incredible here and really do a lot of the heavy lifting. But the supporting cast is also just as winning. I'm not as familiar with the work of Anjana Vasan, but she easily holds her own in a role that is ostensibly the third lead. There's some really powerful stuff here about toxic masculinity that plays as strong satire, despite not being as sharp as it could be. Some of the rougher, less subtle edges are really smoothed out when you've got an actress like Olivia Colman at the center. She's heartbreaking as she's made to feel small by her father anytime she tries to show just a little bit of individualism. She's infuriating and devilishly hateable as she spurs the entire town's antagonism toward Jessie Buckley's character, and she's genuinely hilarious when she gets to cut loose and feign outrage while reading the vulgar anonymous letters. It's such a perfect layered performance, but who could expect anything less from the always reliable Coleman? Ultimately, this is a super charming comedic feminist anthem. It's in theaters Friday, April 5th. Check it out if it piques your interest. Next, I watched the new Rose Glass film Love Lies Bleeding. This one is a sleek little romantic thriller featuring bodybuilding, a whole lot of guns, and Ed Harris eating bugs. I really wanted to love this one. There's a lot of raves out there about it, but I thought the script got out of hand in several moments, leaving this thing just coasting on its excellent vibes. Rose Glass turned in a gorgeous film filled with neon and spandex and blood and sweat and a truly killer soundtrack. The cast is great across the board, including Kristen Stewart as the lead with a dark, mysterious past who slowly lets her walls down as she falls in love. Katie O'Brien is a revelation, turning in an acting performance just as impressive as her extremely enviable bodybuilder physique. Ed Harris is a reliable, menacing villain, and even Dave Franco is great as a perfect slimy little weasel. There are some moments of true inspiration here, with some incredible singular scenes and set pieces, but the script just didn't come together for me. I think Kristen Stewart's backstory is obscured for too much of the movie, keeping the audience at arm's length for a bit too long. I think Katie O'Brien's character is unfortunately underwritten, seemingly functioning in two modes, muscles and love, without a lot of nuance or internal conflict. And in the end, I was confused on what the film wanted my takeaway to be on the actions of its central characters and themes. Instead of a rootable triumph of love and romance, which it feels like the movie is going for, I kinda left feeling like I watched the story of the corruptive nature of toxic love. And if that was the point, I wish we had explored that concept a little more fully. I think there's enough interesting and entertaining stuff here to recommend, it's just made more disappointing by simply showing so much potential. And then I watched the new Roadhouse remake, which left me struggling with the question, what qualifies as a bad movie? I think the script for this film is genuinely garbage. The actual Roadhouse elements feel shoehorned in. There's an annoying, precocious child thrown in for no reason other than to make the audience like the lead character Dalton when he befriends her. Dalton himself is underwritten and too stoic, with a muddled backstory. The tone is all over the place, trying to be a gritty thriller that starts with Dalton depressed and drunk, drunk as he parks his car on some train tracks and then veers wildly into campy 80s throwback fun. All of the female characters are extremely underwritten, and aside from the script, Conor McGregor gives what might genuinely be the absolute worst acting performance I've ever seen in a mainstream film. Just awful, terrible, garbage stuff. And yet, I had a lot of fun with this. The action is overall really fun and inventive. It looks gorgeous, all shot on location, with some thrilling and inventing action set pieces on the water. And despite the script being such a disaster for much of the runtime, there are some genuine sparks of revelation. Arturo Castro is a total scene stealer as one of the villain's henchmen who didn't realize what exactly that job title entails. He's just a nice guy looking for a job and some friends, and his constant pleasantries and begging to be spared from the violence anytime he crosses paths with Dalton is always a delight. Just a smart parody of the usual nameless henchmen who blindly follow their boss to their death in countless action films of this ilk. And I was also genuinely impressed by the introductory scene of the film's primary antagonist, played by Billy Magnuson. He's introduced on a yacht at sea, forcing one of his goons to give him a shave with a straight razor as the waves rock the boat, blaming the barber and the ship's captain for his neck being nicked instead of understanding that the laws of nature still apply to him and make what he's demanding to be literally impossible. It's a perfect example of show don't tell in establishing the entitlement of this prick, and its economic storytelling really stands out amidst all of the other generic and lazily written sequences. So yeah, really mixed bag on this one, but I found myself overall enjoying it. And that inspired me to watch the original 1989 version of Roadhouse, which I had never actually seen before. And while it's not my favorite action film from this era, it's definitely better than the remake. There's so much more personality here. The remake feels forced by countless studio notes to sand down the edges, while elevating the stakes for no real reason or effect. As much as I love Jake Gyllenhaal, Patrick Swayze makes for a much better stoic action protagonist. No one has looked cooler than Sam Elliott does in this movie, and it's just a fun time, and sometimes that's enough. How much does rewatchability count toward your favorite movies of all time? Because I've probably watched The Nice Guys more than any other movie in this past decade. It's an excellent send-up of the noir genre while simultaneously being a perfect addition. Sorry, Blue Valentine, but this is probably the best Ryan Gosling performance of his entire career. Not just insanely funny in his perfect line deliveries as a bit of a himbo private investigator, but also in his frequent uses of physical comedy. Russell Crowe makes for a great deadpan foil, and Angourie Rice takes the precocious kid role that would ruin this entire movie in the wrong hands and turns in a performance that equals her adult co-stars. This movie is a blast, and even though I doubt I'll ever tire of rewatching it, it's a shame we didn't get like 5 sequels and stuff. And that's everything I watched in March. Let me know your thoughts on everything you watched this month in the comments below, and give me some recommendations. Follow me on Letterboxd at Josh D. Floyd if you want my up-to-date thoughts on everything I'm watching, and thank you for watching this video. I'll see you in the next one.